In 1788, when the United States was barely a country,
Right.
it was having its sailors taken as slaves by the Barbary states, the states of the Ottoman Empire in North Africa.
Tripoli.
Tripoli,
The shores of
exactly.
Tripoli.
Shores of Tripoli. Ships stopped. Its crews carried off into slavery. We estimate 1.5 million European and American slaves taken between 1750 and 1815. Jefferson and Adams went to their ambassador in London and said, "Why do you do this to us? The United States has never had a quarrel with the Muslim world of any kind. We weren't in the Crusades. We weren't in the war in Spain. Why do you do this to our people and our ships? Why do you plunder and enslave our people?" And the ambassador said very plainly, Mr. Abdul Rahman said, "Because the Quran gives us permission to do so, because you are infidels." And that's our answer. And Jefferson said, "Well, in that case, I will send a navy which will crush your state," which he did. Islamic fundamentalism is not created by American democracy. It's a lie to say so. It's a masochistic lie. And it excuses those who are the real criminals, and it blames us for the attacks made upon us.
Hello YouTubers, welcome back to the channel. Today's video, I want to do a video for the British people, and I suppose all people, to understand Islam, their tactics, and how we can win the battle pretty easily. And this is an important video because with the events of this year really, and multiple years, I think people are very naive to the threat of Islam, and also most people don't understand Islam and how it works and how most of the Muslim Dawa people and apologists work. They have tactics, and in this video I'm going to explain what all British and Westerners need to know about Islam, and as I say, how we can deal with it going forward. And me personally, I started studying all religions and spirituality over a decade ago, and I knew about all the problems with all the gangs, shall we say, the grooming gangs they call them, but they're not really grooming gangs. They're other gangs I can't say on YouTube, I don't think. And this was in Germany and Sweden when they imported a lot of people from the Muslim world. All of a sudden, these attacks and statistics started going through the roof. We now know in the UK this week with all the grooming gangs that this is partly culture from where they're from, and partly they also use religion, their religion of Islam, to justify it. And whether people believe that's true or not, and I know many Muslims who argue, "Oh no, you're misunderstanding, not the context." Ultimately, you'll know them by their fruits. And we know in Europe and in the UK, they have been abusing our young girls. And onto the video, I have 6 points that I want people to understand. And very simple to understand Islam. It's very simple. You're either a believer or an infidel. And what Muslims do, naturally, because it is the nature of their religion, and it's the nature of all Abrahamic faiths really, is you're either a believer or an infidel. So they don't really care. If you're an infidel, then ultimately that will define you. So if somebody's a believer and they're a bit of a scumbag and they treat people bad and they do evil, they're seen higher than an infidel who seems honorable and noble, because their only interest is in Islam. And in fairness to Islam, it's pretty much similar. It's not as hardcore in Christianity. You know, you're either a follower of Christ or you're not in terms of the Christian belief. I'm a follower of Christ, but I'm not in the Christian terms. Now, the problem with Islam is their scripture and the prophet is very easy for it to fall more into violence than with Christianity. Because if you follow a lot of Prophet Muhammad's life and things he did, you know, marrying children, having all these wives, marrying his, I don't know, what was it, daughter-in-law, all these things, and having orgies with his wives, how Islam spread with the sword. You can see how you could become, it's a bit more hardcore and violent rather than following Jesus Christ, who was perfect. It's impossible for a Christian really to justify any kind of violence. Whereas it's a lot easier to do with the Quran, the Hadith, and Prophet Muhammad. Now, that is point number one. So it's basically believer or infidel. Point number two is the use of Islamophobia is purely a distraction tactic to avoid criticism and try and get away with it. I think looking into it, and a lot of Hindus were saying they carry a machete in one hand and a victim card in the other. And wherever Islam is in the world, wherever it be in India, in Europe, in Israel, with the Buddhists, in Myanmar, they start something and then play the victim. And what you need to understand is their goal is to spread Islam. And then because they know that ways they're doing it is messed up, when they get criticized, instead of saying we're wrong, because they know they're wrong, they pull out the old Islamophobia card. So when you hear people talking of Islamophobia, just understand it's a distraction tactic to try and make people back down. In the same way that in the West, liberalism uses political correctness to shut down criticism. So if you're against immigration and you provide a well-reasoned argument, they'll, because they know that you're right, they'll shout you down by calling you a racist. And the same way, if you make a well-reasoned argument against Islam, because they know they can't debunk it, they'll shout you down as a Islamophobe. Okay, on to point number 3 is one thing they always love to do is they'll say to, when they do these terror attacks, for an example, and then people will stand up against it, or they'll say, we don't want Islam, you need to leave our countries or whatever. They always say these things like, especially to the British, they'll say, well, you're colonizers, so this is revenge. You can't say anything because you're colonizers. Or to the Americans, they'll say, well, you invaded Iraq and Afghanistan and all this stuff. What you need to understand is, again, similar to Islamophobia, this is just a distraction tactic. What they're doing is they're waging jihad, and this is just, I think Dilly Hussein said it, this is a way for them to raise jihad in another way, not obviously a violent jihad, but a way to do it theologically and then using these tactics of distraction. And if you want a further proof of this, is Christopher Hitchens explains this very well. I'll post the clip now, but also essentially what he is saying is, back in 1778, I think it was, is that America had, they were doing some boats or something, some trade with the Muslim countries, and this Muslim country abducted the boat. They took all the Americans hostage. And when the American leader spoke to the Islamic leader and said, what's going on? Why are you doing this to us? We're a new country. We've no problems with the Islamic world. Why are you abusing our people or our ships or whatever? And the Muslim leader said, well, it's very simple. You're infidels, and we're commanded to do these things against you because you're disbelievers. So it debunks the whole theory of, oh no, this is only happening because you're colonizers, because you invaded Syria. It's nothing. It's very simple. Anybody who's not a Muslim is an infidel, and their job is to wage jihad against the infidel and to spread Islam. Their only means is for Islam to win. It's very, very simple. And all this Islamophobia, oh no, you're colonizers, we're only doing this because of this. It's just sneaky little tactics to stop criticism and to stop people fighting back. Okay, so that's point 3. Point number 4 is, you need to understand is that they don't care about what's right, what's serving the true God, or having honor. It's purely about Islam and serving Islam. So for an example, in Britain, generally, we have a sense of honor, and most places have a sense of honor. So you seek what's right rather than your nation or whatever, or your religion. So for an example, if there was an Englishman who was grooming and abusing young Muslim girls, British people would stand against the British man and say he's a scumbag. Whereas within the Islamic community, if you look into these grooming gangs in the UK, they protect their own because they're Muslim rather than doing what's right. As a general rule, obviously you're going to have the odd differential, but as a general rule, they protect their own. And it's disgusting. You even saw in court, these men were proven guilty of abusing young British and Sikh girls, and the families were shouting abuse at the girls in court, and they were saying to their own fathers, who were proven abusers, they're saying, oh, we love you, we'll wait for you to get out of prison, on all this stuff. Whereas that pretty much would never happen with British families. And the difference is, like, the grooming gangs are disgusting, but also, yes, it's true that there are just a lot of white British men who abuse children, such as Jimmy Savile. But the difference is, you'll never get British people defending Jimmy Savile, but you get loads, or well, not just defending, but distracting from the issue. But you get loads of Muslims defending and distracting from the issue of these grooming gangs and covering it up, as we saw. Many people within those communities and with the liberals themselves covered up this abuse. So they do not care about what's right and what's honor. They care about abuse. And one more example on that of how British people do have honor is, There's a lot of hate towards Tommy Robinson, but I thought, let me watch some of his documentaries. And one of his documentaries, he was exposing these grooming gangs, and he found this guy called Mohammed, and he was found out his house to go and speak to him and tell him, expose him. And when he was looking into the case, and he was looking into the girl who accused this guy, he found out that this girl was accusing another guy, uh, a black guy, of rape, and then he accused another British guy, ex-boyfriend, of rape. And then he found out essentially that this girl was not a reliable source, and eventually found out that she was lying. And he actually helped this Muslim man get off, and he freed him. So he found the truth. And if he had an agenda to hate Muslims, he would have just ignored the truth and tried to expose this guy. But he didn't. He had an interest in what was right. And they actually became friends. And this Mohammed guy seemed like a reasonable dude. He was grateful for Tommy Robinson because Tommy Robinson did what was right, not because he was an ideologue, because, he has to hate Islam or whatever. No, he found out what was true and he went with that. Whereas that would never happen the other way around. And as we've seen in practice, they are only interested in defending their communities rather than doing what is right. Okay, number 5 is how the Communist and Islam alliance and the liberals protect Islam. And it's an unholy alliance of what I call communism, and that they both use each other for power. And essentially, they both don't really like each other. And ultimately, once they hope to win the battle, one of them will kill the other. So either the communists will end up killing all the Muslims, or the Muslims will end up killing all the communists and taking over. But it's just an unholy alliance of two evil organizations or ideologies going together. And how they protect Islam is just for a classic example. In this country, you had the Southport attacks and you have the grooming gangs. And the Southport attacks, we were told, oh, no, he was just some Welsh boy. When it turns out that they found ISIS ideology. So obviously, we can deduce from that what probably happened. So what essentially happens is the abuse gets exposed. And so what will happen is step 1 is there'll be an Islamic attack, whether it be terror attack or the grooming gangs. And then when this comes out, the first thing that happens is within Islam and the communists, they protect Islam and they run cover. There's even organizations in England from the Home Office who, when there's a terror attack, they spring into action. The first thing they do is go, we must not blame Islam. We must get the community out. And then they literally go to the family of the bereaved and they get them on stage at the vigils and they say, we need to not blame Islam. There's literally government programs to stop the public uprising. Now, I do not promote violent uprising or anything, riots of that course. But what I do promote is people pushing back and exposing the truth and standing for righteousness. So they do that. And then the next step is anybody who complains about it, again, they'll label them as Islamophobic or as far right. So when Brits are rightly outraged that there's young girls being murdered, or Manchester Arena, young girls being blown up, or young girls being abused, when the public rightly complain, we're shut down being called Islamophobes or far right, which is absurd once you know how the game works. And then the next step is, now they've shut down criticism, they've accused people of being far right. Instead of doing something about the problem, they fund they're evil. So what they'll do is they'll say, we're donating £100 million to protect the Muslim community, even though the Muslim community are not a danger. They're the ones causing the danger. Or they'll get into parliament and say, we need to introduce anti-Islamophobic laws or blasphemy laws. So this is the tactics that they do. And that's very important that people understand that. And the final part of the video, the positive part, is how Islam dies in the UK and in the world, really, which is 3 ways. Number 1, the internet. The internet is destroying a lot of falsities because people can look into not just Islam, but religions. And I've done videos exposing Christianity. And a good meme is about Islam spread by the sword, destroyed by the internet. And it's very true. And in fairness, it's not just Islam, it's Christianities and communism. Once people can look into all these subjects and do their own research, they realize that they've been somewhat deceived. And the second point, I think this is an important point, is to understand that the best way for Brits and Westerners to allow Islam to die is to let and promote ex-Muslims, because there's loads of ex-Muslims coming out now, realizing the truth and doing the work to expose the falsities of Islam. For example, you have like apostate prophets. In the UK, you got Momus Namji. There's a female called Lubna. There's loads of them who are serving righteousness and exposing Islam. And I think it's best for us to, instead of us doing it, if Westerners do it, then Muslims just look at us as an enemy and they can't really relate to us. They just assume that we hate Islam and hate them, which is false anyway. But if we promote ex-Muslims, what can happen is people are more likely to be emboldened to leave Islam if they see people of their own kind who are similar to them. Just in the same way that a Christian will probably not leave Christianity and get convinced by a Muslim. But if they listen to an ex-Christian and then they're like, well, actually, I was in your shoes as well, and what you're saying actually makes some sense, then with time, they'll become an ex-Christian because they'll see the falsities in the religion. And it's the same with Muslims. When they see ex-Muslims or smart Muslims who are somewhat waking up, and they see an ex-Muslim video, and they're like, well, to be fair, he kind of makes some good points. And then that starts them on the track, and then eventually they'll leave the religion and be emboldened. And they won't be intimidated because, in fairness to the Muslims, it is tough to leave because you will be attacked by your community, your family. But now is the time to be brave and to return to the true Father and the Spirit of Christ, and things will be good from there. And then from there, the first step will eventually get around to banning Islam. And I think we should take example from Muslim countries. To protect Islam in Muslim countries, they ban all proselytizing of other religions. They still allow people to practice them, but you can't go around proselytizing for Christianity or for Judaism or for Buddhism because they're protecting their cultural heritage of Islam. And that makes sense. I think in the UK, at minimum, we should ban proselytization. So there should be no people going around doing dawah. We should ban YouTube channels of people trying to spread Islam. So I think we should, at a minimum, just follow the Muslims countries' example, because it's easier for the countries to get along when everybody's on the same track of that we are essentially in the UK and the West, we're Christian countries and Christ following countries. And personally, I would just outright ban it. I'd shut down all mosques and ban Islam from the country because it has caused so much trouble and it's actually a very extreme religion. Or people who are not the smartest can easily be turned to extremism. Wherever Islam goes, it causes trouble. So we'd be better off without it. You know, I was just thinking, could you imagine a country if we woke up tomorrow and all Muslims were Christians? We wouldn't need terrorism barriers. We wouldn't have these grooming gangs. Now, don't get me wrong, we have a big problem in the church with abusing children. So it isn't just an Islamic problem, but there are parts of the Quran and Hadith that can be misconstrued that allow it to be even worse than your average gang. But yeah, we wouldn't have free Palestine protests every week in our major cities. We wouldn't have angry Muslims causing trouble at Speaker's Corner. I barely watch it anymore, but whenever you watch the videos, the Muslims they seem incredibly angry people. And they're always, when they lose debates, they're always like pushing and fighting, trying to intimidate people. I've seen a woman got stabbed, almost died, she was an ex-Muslim. She got attacked. And it's like, ironically, they say it's the religion of peace, but they always seem extremely agitated and angry people. And they love to try and bully and intimidate people when they're in higher numbers. That's why we should not and cannot allow Islam to grow, because when they're in a minority, they're your friendly Muslim. When they're in a majority, they're savages and bully and intimidate people. And as like all bullies, once you stand up to them, they cower and they start crying, oh, Islamophobia. But that's just what cry bullies do. And that's why people like Nigel Farage or all these others should not show any sign of weakness towards them. Go, oh, well, it's a growing population. We need to, we're not going to win unless we get some support from the Muslim. No, do not bow down. Do not show any sign of weakness to Islam. Otherwise, like a bully, they'll see that weakness and try to bully and intimidate you. You stand up to them and show no sign of weakness, and especially when you realize that we are strong and they are weak. And if we stand together and stand in our strength, then they stand no chance. Okay, so that's pretty much the point of my video. I just wanted to put all those points down and teach people about Islam, and so British people understand the tactics they use and how they go about things. Okay, so if you like the video, like it, share it with as many people as you can to let people aware of the tactics involved. Subscribe for more if you're new to the channel, and God bless everyone. Goodbye.